Hello, my friends, and welcome to Just a Darn Good Story. I just want to take a moment of your time to remind you to please tap the thumbs up button, tap the bell if you want notifications of when I'm uploading, and of course, subscribe and comment. For some reason, these things go a long way to helping a channel grow. If you have a thought or a suggestion of a story you would like me to read, please send me an email. And also, if you have your own story that you feel people would be interested in, by all means, send it to me at justadarngoodstory@outlook.com. All right then, please enjoy today's story. A homeless woman named Lisa was invited to come and spend Christmas with her brother, her very judgmental brother. He was only inviting her because people hounded him to do the right thing and to try and help her. She couldn't find a ride, and her brother said he couldn't help her with a bus. So she started to hitchhike. She got a ride with the nastiest man ever. He complained about the weather constantly, especially about the snowstorm they had been calling for and was about to start soon. He was actually going to the same town that she was going to, and it was only a half an hour away now, the town of Eldridge Hollow. But all of a sudden the driver pulled over and said, "I've changed my mind. I don't want to drive through a storm." She was surprised, but then again not. He was not the nicest person. She tried to explain to him that he only had a half an hour left to drive to their destination, or he would have to drive 3 hours back to where they started. He just said, "Look, I want you out." Lisa begged and pleaded, because she would surely freeze to death in a snowstorm that was just about to hit. Her second-hand coat was old and tattered, and the temperature had dropped dramatically since she had gotten into his car. But he refused to let her stay in his car and refused to take her back with him. She stood on the side of the road feeling hopeless, the tears freezing to her cheeks, and not a car in sight. And then she noticed a run-down barn up ahead on the side road, and she started to run for cover, because she knew there were no cars on this road, and if she stayed on it, she would freeze to death. As she neared the barn, she also noticed the remains of a home that had burned down years earlier. But when she neared the run-down structure, she noticed a set of cement steps, 5 to be exact. They were covered in pine needles, but she was so desperate, she went down the steps to the door, which was locked, but luckily the door wasn't closed all the way. She opened the basement door and was surprised. It was a completely untouched apartment. The first thing she noticed was the warmth that hit her in the face, and then she noticed a chair in the corner with a folded newspaper on the arm and a small lamp beside it. The power was actually on. She called out "hello" several times. Not a sound could be heard. She backed out and started looking around. No tire prints, no footsteps. The snowstorm had started, and beads of ice were hitting her in the face. She had no choice. She went back down the basement steps and saw how clean it was, except for a lot of dust on the surface. She went and checked the newspaper. It was announcing Trump's defeat to Biden and what it meant for the country in 2020, and it was dated November 4th, 2020. Lisa went and looked in the bedroom. It was neat and tidy, and it was definitely the room of an elderly woman. Back in the living room, there were pictures of an elderly couple. No children or grandchildren. She had noticed in the bedroom a shelf of diaries. She made a mental note that she would take a look at those later. She went to the refrigerator. It was still on, and it had a lot of bad food in it. The freezer was filled with single portions of meat, much like what an elderly person would do. The pantry was filled with canned goods and boxes of food that had expired in 2020 or 2021. Some of the canned goods were outdated, But Lisa knew that was usually a farce and that canned goods lasted longer than what they said. She opened a can of Chef Boyardee and ate it cold. It was delicious. She noticed another door and thought it might be another bedroom, so she went to take a look at it. It was a utility room with a furnace, hot water tank, and an upright freezer, which also had plenty of pre-made meals inside. There were shelves with tools and various necessities. Then, as she turned to come out, she noticed there was another door behind the open utility door. When she closed the door so she could get a better look, it had a sign that read, "Dangerous, do not open," and it had caution tape crisscrossed in an X to hopefully prevent somebody from opening the door and to realize how serious it was. Lisa thought. Even though her interest was tweaking, she walked out and shut the utility door behind her. She was worried that someone would come in any minute. Lisa went to go to the room and look at the diaries, and when she was on her way to the bedroom, she noticed there was a diary on a small kitchen table. So she sat down and started looking through it. Of course, she went to the last chapter. It talked about going into the hospital for open heart surgery. She said she was so scared, but that even if she dies on the table, she would still be free of every fear she had every night that something would come through that door. Lisa thought, what the heck? She went through the diaries backwards, one chapter at a time. It actually turned out that there were 2 children, but that they were now long gone out of her life. She was lonely and almost ready for death. She said it was better than this. Oh my God, what was this? Lisa wondered. Lisa read 3 diaries. It was mostly about loneliness. Then the beginning of the 4th diary, it was about hearing it all night long, banging on the door. Then it got quiet, she said. The next morning, it said, when she got up, she saw muddy footprints that looked to be about 14 inches long. Each print had 3 toes with long, sharp claws that actually dug into her linoleum. Somehow it got loose, and now it was roaming the earth. The only one safe from it was her, apparently. That was the deal that Mark made with it. Lisa saw the name Rena and Mark on a wedding picture from June of 1969. Both were only 19 years old at the time. After the marriage, Mark invited his dutiful wife to meet with his friends. It wasn't Mark's idea. He didn't want her to know about that part of his life. But they insisted, and when she arrived, they watched her every move. They were pleased that they saw fear on her face. That meant that they could control her, and that was all they needed to know. Things took place that Rena couldn't abide by, but because of her spiritual beliefs, she couldn't leave Mark, thinking he was involved in all that by choice. But Mark made her a promise that as long as she stayed with him, then they and their future children would never be harmed. Mark swore that he was doing this to help humanity by being the gatekeeper. Rena finally agreed to it, but she didn't want to know about any of the details, ever. Mark began searching for the perfect home for them. It had to be a specific area and match exact coordinates. This was what they told him to do. The area was actually not too far from where they were already renting. They bought 100 acres that were to surround the home that they were to build. It was a 2-story home on a concrete basement. Mark told everyone not to ever open that door in the utility room. Ever. Rena kept a beautiful home, but later Rena suspected Mark was cheating on her and started reading through his journals. She discovered that their utility room had to do with those coordinates, and that they had to do with those people that Mark dealt with. Mark's pledge to save humanity. Then, once their son, Philip, 18, was away at university, and their daughter, Amelia, 14 years old, was home alone. She started to snoop for Christmas presents, and then, sure enough, she ended up in the basement in the utility room. She found a key that went to the padlock that kept that door locked, the door she wasn't supposed to go near, the door nobody was to touch. And even though she knew better, she opened it anyways. She pushed the door in gently and felt along the wall just inside for the light switch. It was pitch black. It was freezing cold, and it smelled like sulfur. All of a sudden, something cold and wet grabbed her hand and tried to pull her in. She screamed for her dear life. Mark and Rena had just arrived back home, and both ran to help her. And just before she disappeared into the black room, Mark screamed some odd language, and whatever had a hold of Amelia let go, and she fell on her rear end, shaking and panicking. That night, Amelia packed her bags and went to live with Rena's sister. Amelia was so traumatized, she ended her relationship with her parents forever. Later, Philip discovered what he thought was his father's prayer books. But they weren't prayer books. They were notes that Mark kept about his life with this particular group. Philip threatened to go to the authorities, but instead he chose the same route of his younger sister. He chose to cut ties. Now Rena had lost both children, and she was devastated. She fought with Mark and tried to convince him to sell the property and to move away. He tried to tell her that he couldn't do that, even though she was far more important than anything. She packed her suitcase and went to a hotel. Sometime in the middle of the night, the police came to her door. Her home had burned down, and unfortunately, her husband didn't make it. After she came to her senses, she went back to the house. The whole main floor was destroyed, but the basement was untouched. She tried to see about selling it and going somewhere, but she lost all the gumption. Her depression ruled her life. She felt it was her duty to stay in that house. It actually occurred to her that now she was the gatekeeper. Now she was responsible to keep that door shut, even though she didn't understand why. She had no friends and no family. Even her minister refused to come out to her house. She had good friends at church, but nobody wanted to come and visit her, and most didn't want her visiting them. Lisa didn't know what to think. She felt so bad for this woman. The more she read, the more confused she was. But if her calculations were right, and if her calculations were correct, this basement apartment has been empty since 2020. But clearly, Rena had enough money in the bank, and payments came out automatically. In all these years, nobody came out to check on that poor woman. How sad. She must have died in surgery and never came back to the apartment after. Lisa looked out the windows. It was a solid sheet of white now. She had a very bad, uneasy feeling being there. She suspected she knew what was going on. She went back into Rena's room and looked through the drawers and found some clean items that she could change into. They were almost exactly the same size. Lisa continued to look, or snoop. It was interesting to sneak through people's things that weren't yours. Lisa had been homeless most of the time for the last 6 years. Every time she started feeling ashamed of herself for going through somebody's drawers, somebody she didn't even know, she still felt this odd pull. She needed to know what was in the next drawer. And then, on the other hand, she felt this pull to contact the authorities and report this apartment abandoned. Then she realized that the idea of staying there was very intriguing. Right and wrong in one breath, she laughed. But still, she kept snooping. Under the bed, she discovered a long black box, and inside was a shotgun and several handguns. Then she slid the box back under the bed. And then, strangely enough, she felt under the mattress. Her fingertips felt a stack of money. Her heart beat faster. And then she heard a bang coming from the living room. Or maybe it was the wall that separated the bedroom from the utility room. Lisa couldn't be sure. She pulled out several stacks of money and left them on the bed. It was more money than she had seen in the last 20 years of her life. She decided she would do something with the money after she had her bath. She ended up finding a nightgown and then went into the bathroom. She used all these fancy oils and lotions. A girl could get used to this, she thought. That night she slept in Rena's bed. She was horrified by the sound she heard coming from the utility room. Lisa said the first thing that she noticed was this low, endless rumble, like a baseball-sized rock being dragged along the sidewalk. It was vibrating through the wall, and it made her teeth and her bones ache. And then there were strange voices. At first it wasn't screams, it was like whispers stacked on top of growls. Every so often there would be a sudden yap, a heavy impact, like somebody had thrown a body against the door. It was the worst sounds that I had ever heard. And then finally she fell asleep. But the nightmares were no better. The next day she opened her bedroom door, and the freezing air hit her in the face. And then the sight was horrific. The whole house was upside down. Dishes were smashed. The living room furniture was literally upside down. Lisa ran for the door, grabbing only what she had brought the day before. She noticed there was snowdrifts all over the floor. And then when she got to the stairs, what she saw scared her beyond words. Footprints, hundreds of different footprints. She was careful not to step on them as she went up the stairs. She saw that they came up the steps, across the driveway, and then into the woods. What had she done? Her greed had released whatever had been contained in that room. It would take so much more to put them back, to right the wrong that she had created. She walked to the road with her head hung low. She didn't need to start hitchhiking. A car pulled up. It was a family on their way to church, and she joined them. She now knew it was her duty to right her wrongs, and now she was the gatekeeper. The end. Well, I hope you enjoyed this story. Please do me a favor and hit the like button, hit the bell for notifications of when I'm uploading, and subscribe. Bye for now.